Officer Alex Carter was wrapping up his shift on a quiet afternoon in the small town of Meadow when his phone buzzed. It was an unusual call from the local cemetery caretaker, Mr. Grayson, who rarely contacted the police. "Officer Carter," Alex answered, leaning back in his chair. "Alex, it's Grayson from the cemetery," came the voice, shaky and filled with concern. "I think you need to come down here. Something isn't right." "What's the issue, Mr. Grayson?" Alex asked, already sensing the unease in the man's tone. "It's a grave. A coffin," Grayson said, hesitating. "It's been tampered with. The soil's disturbed and the lid looks broken. I can't explain it over the phone. You have to see it for yourself." Alex frowned, his curiosity piqued. Meadow was a peaceful town where even minor crimes were a rarity. The idea of someone tampering with a grave was both unusual and unsettling. "I'll be there in 15 minutes, Alex said, grabbing his notepad and car keys. As Alex pulled up to the cemetery, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over the rows of gravestones. Mr. Grayson stood by the entrance, his face pale and his hands stuffed into the pockets of his weathered jacket. "This way," Grayson said quickly, leading Alex through the neatly arranged graves to a specific plot. The grave in question belonged to a young man named Samuel Reeves, who had passed away 2 months earlier. Alex immediately noticed the disturbed soil. The earth had been dug up, though hastily covered back. Part of the coffin's lid was visible through the dirt, and it was cracked open, exposing the interior slightly. "Did you see anyone around?" Alex asked, crouching by the grave. "No," Grayson replied. "I did my rounds last night, and everything was fine. This must have happened sometime after that." Alex studied the scene carefully. Whoever had done this had been deliberate, but they hadn't covered their tracks well. There were faint impressions in the soil, as though a shovel or tool had been used. "Who's buried here?" Alex asked, glancing at the gravestone. "Samuel Reeves," Grayson said. "Died in a car accident. Tragic case. He was only 25. His family was devastated." Alex nodded, noting the details in his notepad. "Did Samuel have any enemies, anyone who might have had a reason to do this?" Grayson shook his head. "Not that I know of. He was a kind kid. Always polite, always helping out at the local shelter. I can't imagine anyone wanting to harm him, even after he's gone." Alex stood, his gaze lingering on the damaged coffin. There was something deeply unsettling about the whole scene. A tampered grave, no clear motive, and a victim with no known enemies. It didn't add up. "I'll need to investigate this further," Alex said. "For now, don't let anyone near the grave. I'll be back tomorrow with a team." As Alex drove away from the cemetery, his mind was filled with questions. Who would tamper with a coffin and why? What could they have been looking for? He didn't have answers yet, but he knew this case was just beginning. The following morning, Officer Alex Carter returned to the cemetery with a small forensic team. The early sunlight bathed the gravestones in a golden glow, but the damaged grave stood out starkly against the peaceful backdrop. "All right," Alex said to the team, pulling on a pair of gloves. "Let's document everything. Be careful with the soil. It might give us some clues." The team began their work, photographing the grave and taking soil samples. Alex crouched by the disturbed earth, running his fingers lightly over the edges of the grave. He spotted faint marks where a tool had been used, likely a shovel. "Whoever did this wasn't in a hurry," Alex murmured. "They had time to dig and attempt to cover it back up." One of the forensic technicians called out, "Officer Carter, take a look at this." Alex stood and walked over. The technician held up a small piece of fabric, partially buried in the soil. It was dark gray, frayed at the edges, and appeared to be part of a jacket or shirt. "Bag it," Alex said. "This could be a lead." As the team continued their work, Alex's eyes drifted to the cracked coffin lid. The damage was worse than it had seemed the day before. It looked as though the perpetrator had used a crowbar or similar tool to pry it open. "Let's open it carefully," Alex instructed. The technicians nodded and began clearing away the remaining soil. With great care, they lifted the broken lid of the coffin, revealing the interior. Samuel Reeves's body was still there, dressed in the suit he had been buried in. At first glance, everything seemed untouched. But Alex noticed something odd. There was an envelope resting on Samuel's chest, tucked neatly under his folded hands. "What's this?" Alex muttered, reaching in to retrieve the envelope. The envelope was old and slightly yellowed, as though it had been stored away for years. It was sealed, and on the front was a single word written in neat handwriting: "Truth." Alex's heart pounded as he opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded tightly. He unfolded it carefully, revealing a handwritten letter. "To those who find this, the truth cannot stay buried forever. What was done to me must be uncovered. Only then will I rest in peace." Alex read the letter twice, his mind racing. It was vague, but it hinted at something far more sinister. Was Samuel's death truly an accident? Or had someone tried to cover up the truth? "Bag this letter as evidence," Alex said, handing it to the technician. He turned to Mr. Grayson, who had been watching from a distance. "Do you know if Samuel had any problems with anyone before his death?" Alex asked. Grayson shook his head. "No, like I said, he was a kind soul, always helping people, but—" "But what?" Alex pressed. "There was something strange about the day he died," Grayson admitted. "His car went off the road near the old quarry. They said it was an accident, but—" "But," Grayson hesitated. "There were rumors. People said Samuel was meeting someone that day, someone he trusted, nobody knows who." Alex's instincts kicked into high gear. If Samuel had been meeting someone before his death, it might explain the cryptic letter. Someone didn't want the truth to come out, and they had gone so far as to disturb his grave to keep it hidden. After securing the letter as evidence, Alex headed back to the station, his thoughts swirling with possibilities. The letter found in Samuel's coffin suggested a cover-up, and Grayson's mention of a mysterious meeting on the day of Samuel's death only deepened the mystery. Sitting at his desk, Alex opened Samuel's case file. It was thin, too thin, he thought, for a case involving a young man's sudden death. The official cause of death was listed as accidental, with no indication of foul play. Samuel's car had veered off the road near the old quarry and crashed into a ravine. No witnesses, no suspects. But Alex's gut told him there was more to the story. He scanned the list of people interviewed after Samuel's death. It included family members, a few close friends, and the owner of the diner where Samuel had worked part-time. But one name stood out: Evan Carter, Samuel's childhood friend and former roommate. Alex drove to Evan Carter's home, a modest house on the outskirts of town. The yard was overgrown, and the paint on the shutters was peeling, but it was clear someone lived there. Alex knocked on the door, and after a moment, a man in his late 20s answered. His face was pale, and his eyes were sunken, as if he hadn't slept in days. "Evan Carter?" Alex asked, showing his badge. "Yeah, that's me," Evan replied, his voice hesitant. "What's this about?" "I'm investigating Samuel Reeves's grave," Alex said, watching Evan's reaction closely. "It was tampered with recently. I need to ask you a few questions about him." Evan's eyes widened, and he stepped back, gripping the doorframe. "His grave? Who would do that?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out," Alex said. "You were close to Samuel, right?" "Yeah," Evan said, his voice softening. "We grew up together. He was like a brother to me." Alex nodded. "Do you know if Samuel had any enemies? Anyone who might have wanted to harm him?" Evan shook his head. "No, Sam wasn't like that. He didn't have enemies. Everyone loved him." Alex paused, then leaned in slightly. "Grayson, the cemetery caretaker, mentioned that Samuel might have been meeting someone on the day he died. Do you know anything about that?" Evan froze, his face draining of color. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said quickly, avoiding Alex's gaze. Alex's instincts flared. Evan was hiding something. "Evan," he said firmly, "if you know something, now's the time to tell me. This isn't just about his grave. It's about finding the truth." For a moment, Evan said nothing, his hands trembling slightly. Finally, he sighed and slumped against the doorframe. "All right," he said quietly. "Sam told me he was going to meet someone the day he died. He didn't say who, just that it was important. He seemed nervous about it." "Did he give you any details?" Alex pressed. Evan shook his head. All he said was that it had to do with something from his past, something he wanted to make right. Alex frowned. "Did he say where he was going?" Evan hesitated. He mentioned the old quarry. Alex's heart sank. The quarry was where Samuel's car had gone off the road. If Samuel had been meeting someone there, it couldn't have been a coincidence. "Thank you, Evan," Alex said. "If you remember anything else, call me." As Alex left Evan's house, a new lead began to form in his mind. The old quarry might hold the answers he was looking for. The drive to the old quarry was short, but for Alex it felt like an eternity. The closer he got, the more questions filled his mind. What was Samuel doing here the day he died? Who was he meeting? And how did it all tie back to the tampered grave and the mysterious letter? The quarry was an isolated area, surrounded by dense trees and overgrown brush. The road leading to it was narrow and uneven, a mix of dirt and gravel that hadn't been maintained in years. Alex parked his car near the edge of the site, stepping out into the crisp midday air. The scene was eerily quiet, save for the occasional rustling of leaves in the breeze. He scanned the area, noting the steep drop where Samuel's car had reportedly veered off the road. The incline was treacherous, covered in loose rocks and tangled roots. Alex walked carefully down the slope, his boots crunching against the gravel. About halfway down, he stopped, noticing something unusual. A patch of disturbed soil just off the beaten path. Crouching down, Alex brushed away the dirt with his hands. Buried beneath the surface was a small, rusted lockbox. It was old and dented, but intact. Alex's pulse quickened as he pried it open with his pocket knife. Inside, he found several items. A folded piece of paper with Samuel's handwriting. A photograph of Samuel with a young woman, both smiling brightly. A set of car keys. Alex unfolded the paper first, his eyes scanning the words. "If something happens to me, it wasn't an accident. The truth is in the letter I left. She deserved better than what happened to her, and I couldn't let it stay hidden." The cryptic message sent a chill down Alex's spine. The woman in the photo must have been significant to Samuel, possibly the person tied to the secret he was trying to uncover. Alex pocketed the items and climbed back up the slope. He needed more answers, and there was one person who might have them: Samuel's mother. That afternoon, Alex visited the Reeves household. The small, tidy home was filled with photographs of Samuel, capturing his life from childhood to adulthood. Mrs. Reeves, a kind woman in her late 50s, greeted Alex at the door, her face etched with sadness. "Officer Carter," she said, her voice soft. "Is this about Samuel?" "Yes, ma'am," Alex replied gently. "I'm trying to get to the bottom of what happened to him. I found something at the quarry, something that suggests his death might not have been an accident." Mrs. Reeves's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" Alex showed her the photograph of Samuel with the young woman. "Do you know who this is?" Mrs. Reeves's expression softened. "That's Claire," she said. "She and Samuel were close friends when they were younger. She passed away a few years ago." "What happened to her?" Alex asked. She died in an accident at the factory where she worked," Mrs. Reeves explained. "There was a fire and she didn't make it out. Samuel was devastated. He always felt like there was more to the story, but no one would listen to him." Alex nodded, piecing the story together. Samuel must have uncovered something about Claire's death, something that led him to the quarry that day. "Did Samuel ever mention finding evidence related to Claire?" Alex asked. Mrs. Reeves hesitated, then nodded. "A few days before he died, he said he had proof that Claire's death wasn't an accident. He wouldn't tell me what it was, but he seemed determined to do something about it." "Thank you, Mrs. Reeves," Alex said. "You've been very helpful." As Alex left the house, a clearer picture began to form. Samuel's death was connected to Claire's, and someone had gone to great lengths to keep the truth buried. Back at the station, Alex spread out all the evidence he had gathered on his desk. The photograph of Samuel and Claire, the lockbox note, the keys, and the cryptic letter found in Samuel's coffin all painted a troubling picture. It was becoming clear that Samuel's death wasn't accidental, but the exact motive and people involved still eluded him. He focused on the most pressing question: what connection did Claire's death have to Samuel's? He reviewed Claire's case file, which he had requested from the archives earlier that day. The file confirmed what Mrs. Reeves had said. Claire had died in a fire at a local textile factory 3 years ago. The fire had been ruled an accident, caused by faulty wiring, and the case was quickly closed. but Samuel's notes suggested otherwise. He believed the fire was no accident, and that someone had covered it up. Samuel was digging too deep, Alex muttered to himself. And it got him killed. He returned to the lockbox, picking up the set of keys. There were 3 keys on the ring, one for a car, one for a house, and a smaller one that looked like it belonged to a locker or safe. Alex examined the smaller key more closely. It had a faint engraving on it. DW Storage. Storage, Alex said aloud. Grabbing his jacket, he decided to pay a visit to the only storage facility in town, DW Secure Storage. The storage locker. The storage facility was a quiet, unassuming building on the edge of town. The manager, an older man with a thick mustache, greeted Alex at the front desk. "Afternoon, officer," the man said. "What brings you here?" "I need access to a storage unit connected to a case I'm investigating," Alex said, showing the manager the key. The man inspected the key and nodded. "That's Unit 37. It's rented under Samuel Reeves's name. He's had it for about 2 years." The revelation surprised Alex. Samuel had been renting a storage unit for years, possibly to hide something important. The manager led Alex down a long corridor of metal doors until they reached Unit 37. Alex inserted the key, and with a soft click, the lock opened. He pulled up the rolling door to reveal a small, neatly organized space. Inside were boxes stacked on shelves, a filing cabinet, and a metal case sitting on the floor. Alex's eyes immediately went to the metal case. He knelt down and opened it, finding a collection of documents, photographs, and a USB drive. The documents included inspection reports and employee complaints about the textile factory where Claire had worked. Many of the reports highlighted safety violations that had gone unaddressed, including issues with the building's electrical system. One document in particular stood out. It was a memo from the factory's owner, Mark Fletcher, dated 2 weeks before the fire. The memo dismissed the safety concerns as too expensive to fix and instructed management to downplay any complaints. Alex clenched his jaw. The factory fire hadn't been an accident, it had been negligence. He plugged the USB drive into his laptop and opened the files. Among them was a video recording of Claire and Samuel sitting together and discussing the factory's unsafe conditions. "We need to report this," Claire said in the video. "People's lives are at risk." "I'll back you up," Samuel replied. "They can't ignore us if we stick together." The video ended abruptly, leaving Alex with a bitter realization. Claire had tried to expose the factory's negligence, but instead her efforts were silenced, and Samuel had paid the ultimate price for digging it up again years later. A new target. The name Mark Fletcher now stood out like a glaring beacon in Alex's mind. Fletcher, the factory owner, had to be connected to both Claire's death and Samuel's. He had the motive to silence them: money and reputation. Alex quickly ran a background check on Fletcher. He discovered that Fletcher was still in town, living in a large estate just outside Meadow Ridge. Armed with the evidence from the storage unit, Alex knew it was time to confront Fletcher and uncover the full truth. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting an orange hue over Meadow Ridge, Alex Carter drove to the sprawling estate of Mark Fletcher. The mansion stood as a stark reminder of the wealth that had come from decades of business ventures. Ventures built, Alex now realized, on negligence and lives lost. Alex parked his car at the gate and rang the intercom. A gruff voice answered. "Who's there?" "Officer Alex Carter, Meadow Ridge Police Department," Alex said. "I need to speak with Mr. Fletcher." There was a pause before the gates creaked open. Alex drove up the long driveway, his resolve hardening with every step toward the truth. At the door, Fletcher himself greeted Alex, dressed casually in a sweater and slacks. He was in his late 60s with silver hair and a confident, almost dismissive air about him. "Officer," Fletcher said, his tone polite but guarded, "what can I do for you?" Alex wasted no time. "I'm investigating the death of Samuel Reeves and its connection to the fire at your textile factory 3 years ago." Fletcher's expression didn't change, but his posture stiffened slightly. "I don't see how those events are related," he said smoothly. "They're related because Samuel found evidence tying you to the factory fire," Alex replied, holding up the memo he had discovered in the storage unit. "This document shows you ignored safety concerns. That fire wasn't an accident, and you knew it." Fletcher's jaw tightened, but he remained composed. "Those are old reports," he said. "And the fire was ruled an accident. You don't have proof of anything." "I also have this," Alex said, pulling out a copy of the video from the USB drive. He played the clip on his phone, letting Fletcher hear Claire and Samuel's voices as they discussed exposing the factory's conditions. Fletcher's face darkened. "Where did you get that?" "Samuel had a storage unit," Alex said. "He kept everything, documents, videos, even his final note saying if anything happened to him it wasn't an accident. He was meeting someone the day he died, wasn't he? That someone was connected to you." Fletcher's confidence began to crack. He stepped back, his face pale. "You don't know what you're talking about," he muttered. "I know you had everything to lose if this came out," Alex pressed. "Your reputation, your fortune. When Claire tried to expose the truth, she died in that fire. And when Samuel found the evidence and tried to do the same, he ended up in a ravine." Fletcher's composure broke. "I didn't kill them," he shouted, his voice shaking. "But you let it happen," Alex shot back. "Your negligence cost lives, and when they tried to hold you accountable, you looked the other way. And when Samuel got too close to the truth, someone made sure he wouldn't expose you." Fletcher's shoulders slumped. For the first time, he looked defeated. "I didn't order anyone to kill him," he said quietly. "I told my men to scare him, that's all. I didn't know they'd go that far." Alex stared at him, disgusted. "You knew exactly what you were doing. You let your greed come before human lives, and now 2 good people are gone because of you." Within hours, Fletcher was in custody. Based on his confession and the evidence Alex had collected, the district attorney's office began preparing a case against him. Fletcher's men, who had been involved in both the factory cover-up and Samuel's death, were also identified and arrested. The truth Samuel had fought so hard to uncover was finally out in the open. A week later, Alex stood in the Meadow Ridge Cemetery, staring at Samuel Reeves's grave. The earth had been smoothed over, the gravestone clean and simple. In his hand, Alex held a bouquet of wildflowers, which he placed gently by the headstone. "You did it, Samuel," Alex said softly. "The truth is finally out, and the people responsible will face justice. You didn't die in vain." Nearby, Mrs. Reeves watched silently, tears streaming down her face. She approached Alex, her voice trembling. "Thank you, Officer Carter, for believing in my son and for giving us the closure we needed." Alex nodded, his chest heavy with emotion. He was a brave man. He did what was right no matter the cost. "I'm just glad I could help finish what he started." As the sun set over the cemetery, Alex felt a sense of peace. Though the journey had been long and painful, Samuel's legacy of truth and justice would live on.
Subscribe and press the bell icon so that you never miss the amazing video.